Welcome to the Hershey Drive. Let's spend 15 minutes exploring the crisis on the border. Crises on the border. All right, let's give it in a nutshell here. What you're reading about: Top Corner Drudge, Fox News, you name it. Everybody's covering not only the National Declaration of an Emergency along the border, but Secretary Nielsen's congressional testimony, the dogged attempts by Democrats to paint her as an incompetent hack, parroting talking points for the administration, and simultaneously trying to disavow a crisis on the border and embrace the humanitarian need to bring in hundreds of thousands of Central Americans, Latin Americans into the country. So it's a conflicted stance that the Democrats are embracing. So one must ask themselves at this point, why a decently funded subset of government workers along the border control, the border patrol, and all the immigration control initiatives that we have, and no real excuses for way higher numbers than what even Obama was experiencing with his basically open-armed asylum. So why do we have this going on? Well, listen, I have my theories. Everybody else can have their own, but I would look into the theory that judges are very fickle. Federal judges are very fickle animals. They can be swayed in some cases even by a narrative written or repeated by mainstream media sources in order to dictate intent by politicians, why laws were written, why executive orders were made. They will try to divine intent, and if that intent is not pure enough for them, then they will strike down an initiative, particularly of the executive branch. So I don't think we could have a great shot in the court system, all the way and up to and including the Supreme Court, if we were cracking down at the border in a way that was methodical and precise, and we were really cleaning up the numbers. That's not the way you reprogram $8 billion of expenditures that were assigned to other line items. So I'm not going to say that we're turning a blind eye to the immigration that is surging across the border. I am going to say that in 2014, Obama described the situation at the border as a humanitarian crisis. These are the statements and actions that the court will weigh as to whether or not this is an acceptable execution of Article 2 authority to get around some of the Article 1 issues with the purse strings. So I'm not going to go ahead and say that we are doing a lot of catch and release for no reason. I mean, we are giving up historic highs here of releasing people back into the country. We are hook, line, and sinker taking these parroted, ridiculous recitation of asylum requests. The only thing they can say in English is what some George Soros-funded group trained them to say, whether they're from Guatemala, whether they're from Venezuela, Colombia, probably not Colombia, but in some cases Colombia, and El Salvador. We're running into some issues there, but why? Why would we have 160,000? Why would we be way above Obama's pace when we have the resources, we have the assets, and it doesn't seem like Secretary Nielsen is carrying out the mission that Donald Trump is talking about carrying out? Is she basically functioning under a different set of orders? My guess would be yes. My guess would be that if you do not, now this is the trading the short term for the long term plan here. So if you know you've got one legitimate shot prior to your reelection to get substantial parts of the border wall constructed, you've got one shot. That shot being the declaration of emergency, withstanding a challenge, a court challenge on the merits of a constitutional argument. Judges will be swayed by things as peripheral as border crossing statistics versus sexual assaults that are incurred versus unemployment and criminal statistics once they are in the country, once they don't go back for their hearings on asylum. All these things will be compounded and presented by the Solicitor General eventually to the Supreme Court, and somebody's going to have to answer whether or not it meets the merit of a national emergency. Now, we have legitimately, either by creation of our own volition or just by happenstance, by activism in Latin America, trying to send up every problem child they have in order to change the political dynamics of our country's discussions on immigration. Either way, what we have now is closer to being constituted as an emergency than we have before. So all these things are very important as we line up. So like I was saying, long-term goals probably beat the short-term objective of reducing border crossings to sub-Obama levels, which we did for the first year in office, and then they began to surge again. So I would like to think there's a systematic approach here by the administration to allow a short-term problem to potentially address the long-term solution, and that'll be a matter of jurisprudence that won't be decided in any other way. So it occurred to me today while reading the onslaught of statistics that we were forcing this talking point into the bloodstream. This is antithetical in a lot of ways to the Trump doctrine, and it seems to be getting eaten up by some on the far right who have chastised him, like Ann Coulter and others in the Never Trump circles as well, saying he's ineffective on stopping immigration. He says one thing and then does another. I'm not really sure that's the case. If I were a thinking man, which I'm going to, in this case, posit myself as one, I think I'm looking ahead to the court arguments already. If I'm the administration, I've got to flare up a legitimate emergency, and it's going to require empiricism, which is a word you'll hear me use a lot. And the courts will take a fair dose of conjecture and media reports and quotes out of context. They will weigh all of them against the merits of the actual arguments in a constitutional sense. But in the end, they will also need to weigh the actual statistics that are applying to it. So wouldn't it constitute an emergency a little bit easier? Would you reach that benchmark if you had more crossings, more asylum requests, less area to contain them at all for even 10 days? You had more unaccompanied children. You had more unaccompanied girls getting raped, coming across the border as young as 9 and 10 years old and being administered pregnancy tests, which is definitely a humanitarian crisis. It's disgusting and it's amoral. I think you could possibly get, once you get into en banc, if you get there with like the Ninth Circuit, you can put them in a really bad, you can put 3 federal judges in a really bad spot before you even get to en banc or request en banc. So we already know the Ninth Circuit is going to be the competing circuit here. We'll have another case in the Fifth Circuit that'll probably be upheld, and then we'll have dual tracks, and then that's another indicator that the Supreme Court will not be able to shy away. And as I explained this a couple days ago, I'll explain it one more time. The Supreme Court will always defer a political argument until the least political atmosphere could be applied. So the closer you get to a presidential election, the further away the Supreme Court will want to be when basically construing a constitutional question that could be perceived in partisan terms. In this case, obviously, immigration is third rail issue in American politics. So John Roberts, King Swing, we're going to call him now. King Swing doesn't want to deal with this because he doesn't want any institutional pressure put upon SCOTUS to have to make this determination. Well, sorry, King Swing. Not only do we have a constitutional crisis based on Article 1 versus 2 authority arguments, we have competing statutory authority arguments, and we have a timely issue where we've got things that need to be done immediately, and we've got competing court decisions in all likelihood between the 9th and the 5th Circuit. So all of these things will ratchet up the pressure to get SCOTUS to listen to it as early as possible. I would think maybe going into this fall session, I think we can get it to them, because I don't think they're going to want to do it at all in an election year. They're going to want to try to get this decision on the national emergency decided at least 1 year out from the presidential election. That's my prediction. May or may not come true, but I've been following the court's activities for quite some time, and this seems to be the direction that the court's moving in. So Trump is in the awkward position of having to take shots, not only from the never-Trumpers who never liked him, but also strategically from the Bannon crank machine, which is voiced by Ann Coulter, Breitbart, Horowitz, all these people that will take shots at the president and his border statistics. But I would keep one thing in mind, and that would be, will I trade 160,000 cases that are going to be released essentially into this country in the interim, at least probably closer to 300,000 before this can be decided? Will I trade 300,000, which technically should still be adjudicated, and we could still put enormous resources into tracking them down and bringing them to the deportation hearing? But considering we're 900,000 cases in a backlog, that's going to take an enormous political capital usage, and I don't know that we'll get there. I'm willing to see this thing, prima facie evidence that we've got a crisis, it's out of control, and a nominal investment, a budgetary investment, will not address this if we are already exceeding Obama levels and historic highs at the border, with only more effective, whatever you want to call it, organizational efforts made by these humanitarian groups south of Mexico. Then I'm inclined to say I'm willing to make this trade-off, because I cannot imagine what the flip side of this coin is going to look like, because we are drastically changing the landscape of this country. And they are definitely looking to settle a lot of these people in politically strategic places. The underground groups that are funded by the Soroses of the world also fund a lot of church-affiliated groups that are known as humanitarian groups that function within the realm of the ministries and tax-exempt entities in America. And they are using basically an underground railroad for immigrants, and they're funneling them into towns and cities where they have their own little area, and they can essentially not assimilate, and they could deculturize the area and basically bring their own culture in there. And that's the last thing we want, because then they become politically affiliated, and then they have the protections of their local government officials who may be citizens, but they will make sure that the non-citizens end up on the voter rolls. So that's the huge problem. You see what happened in Wisconsin. We let a liberal in there because Scott Walker came up limp, and that liberal has just signed legislation that is going to make it possible for a New York, California style non-citizen, non-resident driver's license to be issued. And that will eventually, within a matter of months, turn into deliberate voter roll inflation with these people. And they will vote, and they will vote knowing that they can avoid any type of conflict with law enforcement, because the politicians in control at the state, local level are complicit. Very important. It's a very important thing. And I'm not an alarmist. Anybody who's followed me for a while, I'm not an alarmist on this front at all. I'm not going to say that we have like this massive fraud that we are losing these elections. Granted, we've got ballot harvesting in California being legalized, which is just an illegal activity made legal by the state government, and we can't seem to stop it. So again, we have issues where Democrats don't play fair, like we have in Maricopa County in Arizona. So we got to wise up, and I think Kelly Ward will address that issue in Arizona. We're not going to fall asleep again in there for 2020 election. But we've got to wise up. We've got to wise up. Before you attack, when you read these statistics, they're going to continue to read statistics in the next 6 months about just how many of these people are coming into the country. It's going to make them look like they have serious efficiency and efficacy issues at the border and at the patrol and at DHS in general. I wouldn't get too excited about that. I wouldn't get too excited about it because it's all going to come up in the court case. If you don't have an emergency that is represented by facts and figures, the court is not going to defer to your executive powers that are not expressly spelled out in Article 2 of the Constitution. It is simply not going to work because you're going up. You're using temporarily precedential decisions by the court on statutory authority of executive use of that particular power, and you're going up against something that's not in the Constitution, and then you're going up against the expressly stated power of the purse strings in Article 1. So I think you need a pretty strong case on facts and figures. And facts and figures, they have to be realistic. They have to be occurring. So what does that mean? Unfortunately, it means that a lot of these people are legitimately just cruising around right now in our country. And they're settling down in places that are very politically expedient for our opposition. So just think about this. Next time you want to fire off an angry tweet about, why Trump's not keeping his word about the border. I believe Trump is seeking to accomplish a long-term goal by giving in on a short-term objective. That's my thinking. You can take it or leave it. That's all I've got. I have arrived in Hershey. Thanks for riding along with me. This, of course, like all my Periscopes, will be moved over momentarily to the MAGA Coalition YouTube channel. I will do my Periscopes, and I will move them all over to MAGA Coalition YouTube channel. If you want that channel, you want to be a subscriber, just search MAGA Coalition. We are the only option. Click there, subscribe it. You will find a warehouse of all my Periscopes on the issues of the day. Thanks for tuning in.